do you think young people are stupid? Because I don't know. I can't understand why anyone will join the army. Like, at the moment, you've made it impossible for young people to get on the housing ladder. You've made it almost impossible to get a doctor's appointment. Instead of taxing social media companies, you've taken it out on people that are disabled and can't work and the elderly. And then, to top it off, if you do go overseas and fight for your country and you shoot a Taliban member, and then you go to jail for 7 years after serving. And if that doesn't happen to you, the best case is you probably live in destitution and on the street. And so I think that it's not about selling it better. It's that people aren't that stupid anymore. I mean, the young people in this country have never got less. And why? Okay. And then somebody in a nice suit.
What's your question, Chris?
My question is, why would anybody want to join the army, basically?
Okay. Right. Well, let's put that to our panel. Jim Murphy.
Why would anyone want to join the Army, the Royal Navy or the Royal Air Force? Yep. Look, I've never served, so I'm not sure if anyone in the panel has. But the members of the armed forces that I meet are motivated by a desire to improve themselves and protect their country. Sometimes, of course, it's because they can't find work in other fields, but in the main, it's because they have in effect a calling, a commitment, a sense of vocation. Often it'll run in the family. And I'm hoping today, and I'm assuming Chris's phone calls relating to this, I'm hoping today in the Defence Review it makes it a little more attractive to join any branch of His Majesty's Armed Forces, particularly what they've announced today on housing. Because Chris, I don't agree with everything that Chris has said, but the point about how do we care for those who are in service is a really important one. So a big announcement today on improving armed forces housing, and I think that will make it in some way more attractive, as will the above inflation pay increases. But you can pay people any amount of money and you can make the housing as attractive as you like. Ultimately, people still have to want to serve because it's the most dangerous job that we ask anyone to do.
Harriet.
I think it's quite a sad question, actually. I think we as a country and people within this country should be awfully proud of the country that we are and the want to serve, the purpose of wanting to serve, and actually showing the patriotism to actually want to stand up for our country in every aspect of our country, whether that's the people, the place, the traditions, our character. Is something that we should all be pushing towards as much as we possibly can, and something that we should always be sort of promoting and pushing forward. One thing I think Chris is right on is talking about sort of coming home and sort of any sort of concerns with actions on the battlefield following you home. And we have seen recently with the Northern Ireland Legacy Act being repealed and things like that, and that is concerning, and that is the sort of thing which will drive people away from wanting to join the armed forces if they think that sort of actions that happen in the face of war, in the heat of battle, can follow them for the rest of their lives, and that is concerning. But no matter what job you have, whether that is entering the armed forces, entering teaching, entering medical services, people have a calling and people want to serve and people want to make the country a better place in whatever way they choose to do that. Some do that through the armed forces. I actually tried to join the armed forces. I tried to join the army when I was young. I couldn't get in because I didn't pass the medical. I think actually there are some places or some areas within the armed forces, such as the medical conditions, where they are probably a bit too stringent, and actually you lose a lot of potential recruits to the forces because of that. But I think the idea of people not wanting to join is doing down a huge reason why our country is as great as it is, and actually the patriotism that we show. And we saw that, for example, during COVID, people getting together and actually standing up for each other, standing up for the country. And I think that's something that we should celebrate and always push towards increasing this year, next year, and for every year down the line.
I have an explanation for your promotion. Apparently that's how you were described on BBC Parliament this afternoon. Can't trust the BBC on anything, can you? Honestly.
Nightmare.
Ella Whelan.
I think it's a great question because a lot of the discussion today has been about how this is going to be funded, what kind of machinery is going to be used, and the existential question about whether or not you're going to convince a new generation to actually, whether it's fly the drones or go out in the boots and do the work of being more ready, hasn't been covered. And the reason why we can't answer the question of why should young people join the armed forces is because I think we don't know what it is we do stand for as a country. I mean, there's a very nice speech that you just gave mentioning COVID and how great a country we are. I wouldn't want to disagree with it, but in order to feel like a great country, you have to know what you are about, what you stand for. And I don't think we do. We don't have a coherent identity. I'd like to say that it was, what does it mean to be from this country? It means I'd like to say it means believing in tolerance, freedom, democracy. But you look at what's happening, I mean, elsewhere in the news today, someone's been convicted and fined for burning a Quran. So blasphemy laws exist in this country. So we're
Which
a
we'll
mess.
be talking about after 9.
Well, great, but we're a mess, and no politician from any party has the guts to ask that question, which is, what do we stand for? And so if you're asking young people to risk their lives for a sense of a nation that they're meant to be patriotic about, or that they're meant to serve, you have to have the answer for what it is they're serving for. And it's, at the moment, it comes down to sort of COVID, how nice we were to each other in COVID. We weren't nice to each other in COVID. COVID was a really bleak time in which the state sold out its citizens. I think a terrible example.
I think the point I was making there is that it shows that actually when we need to, people come together. So communities looked after each other, people looked after the elderly, they looked after their neighbours. When we need to pull ourselves together and actually show that we do have more than just a selfish gene in our bodies, we can do it as a country. And that is something that we need to make sure that we are feeding, promoting and working sure that we're working towards, and whether that is through actually stronger ways in which we can recruit into the armed forces, making sure that retention is better, showing that it is actually a really valued career with lots of different opportunities within it. There is something in all of us which is innately there that actually means that we will be altruistic and we will serve our country if we need to and when we need to.
That sounds great, but it's not. It sounds like you're talking about the NHS rather than people who are potentially going to war. I mean, if you're asking people to go to war, there has to be some belief in the political motivation behind that war readiness. There was, you look back at previous wars, there was always a sense of the political element of it, of people believing in the mission of what the war was being fought for. And, whether it's the threat of Russia or, we can keep talking about ourselves as a democratic nation and how important it is and how proud we are of it. But when you look at the sort of day-to-day facts of what's happening in British politics, whether it's the years of Brexit, whether it's, minor things like the row going on with Sir Lindsay Hoyle at the moment and the Speaker and how the Labour Party's handled this announcement, democracy is a word that most politicians wouldn't know about if you hit them over the head with it. So my point is,
let's go to a member of the House of Lords.
Different scale.
Yeah.
Natalie.
Well, I don't think anyone's really addressed the sort of underlying point in Chris's question, which is young people feeling like they have not been treated well in society, with massive levels of child poverty, where food banks, hygiene poverty are a huge issue, where schools are failing so many people. People are being pushed out of schools, pupils are being pushed out of schools. And I think Chris was getting at, first of all, the point of, if young people don't feel like Britons are giving them a good life, then, why should they want to serve? I think that was the underlying point, and I think he has a very powerful point. But
couldn't he have made that point in the 1930s as well?
Yep,
unemployment
every generation.
I mean, it's not unique to our times now, is it?
Well, I think what's different about these times is there is a massive amount of wealth in our society. I mean, the 1930s were a time of economic collapse. We're now in a society where people can see a few people making huge amounts of money, and so many people, so many whole communities, abandoned communities in the north, being left just without the investment, without the government support. The focus down on London and the southeast, and that leaves people very disillusioned. And the practical reality, of course, is that lots of people who do go in to serve are actually recruited from those communities because, as Jim said, they don't have any other choice available to them. And we recruit, as no other country in Europe does, 16 and 17-year-olds, and that's something that I've long been working against. I've just been working on the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill in the House of Lords, where we've acknowledged that we haven't protected people, particularly women serving in the military, nearly well enough. And so we've gone from the Ombudsman to the Armed Forces Commissioner to try and protect people better who are serving there. But we can't forget the point that I was at a military briefing only a couple of months ago, we were still losing 300 people more a month than we were actually recruiting. So, I'm going to agree with Jim about the housing point. I took part in the Armed Forces parliamentary scheme, so I was embedded with the RAF a couple of years ago, and I saw some terrible housing. And that's something that we're recruiting people from the poorest communities. We're not treating them properly in terms of military culture, and they're in terrible housing.
Elena's got a comment here. She says all MPs should do some voluntary armed service before being elected. Do as I say, not as I do. Well, there are, I think, compared to when you were in the House of Commons, Jim, there are far more MPs with some sort of military background in today's House of Commons than there were 10, 20 years ago.
I think there are now more MPs, newly elected MPs in Parliament, who with an armed forces background than in any election in the last 5 decades. And I think that's a good thing. I think Parliament needs to have butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, and members of the ex-members of the armed forces. That's what we need,
more candlestick makers.
And butchers and bakers. But I think, was it Elaine that texted in? There are such schemes. I did the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme with the Royal Navy. I also did the Parliamentary Police Scheme. It's not a huge amount. It's 30 days over a year, but at least it gives you some insight. But it's a very light touch replacement for the genuine service that these people who have brought a career of the armed forces into Parliament.
Well, it's just, this is what you can't do it like it's you do a few days at a bake sale. It's not something that you sort of volunteer in this sort of altruistic way. I mean, the whole point of serving is you're making a political decision to defend your country and potentially kill other people at the behest of the leaders of your country. I mean, that's an inherently political decision. I hate it that the government said it's going to work with the Department for Education get 30% more cadets by 2030. And all the adverts you see for recruitment are all selling this to young people as ways to get fit or ways to be interested in technology. And it's avoiding the real issue is when are you going to sit down with this young person and say, right, I'm potentially going to ask you to push this button or pull this trigger, and someone might die, and when they ask you why, you should have a good answer. And the fact is we don't have the answer, which is a strong defence of what it means to be British, what it means to live in this country, why we're better than the people we're fighting, whatever it is. And the Labour Party the government hasn't managed anywhere in this review or an announcement got to the heart of the matter, which is you can spend all the money you like, but you're not going to get anyone sign up for it unless you make the convincing political argument for why we need to be war ready.